We need to reindustrialize. We can't just have banking and lawyers and accountants, which are all gatekeepers and elitists and earning ridiculous amounts of money for doing very little.
Yeah.
It upset people saying that, but that's the truth.
Philip, as we were saying, we're just chatting really, so that's helpful, and we're not live, which is yet more helpful. But I just wanted to ask you, just as a bit of a scene setter, what you think is wrong today with 21st century Britain? And it's a huge question, but let's just start with your general views.
Yes, the way I see it is the systems of the institutions are not working. As I think about what's happened over the last few hundred years, I think the last time we had a similar era was 400 or 500 years ago, when the printing press was created. It took time to have an impact, but what that did, it was a shift of power from the elite to the many. And before then, the priests, the kings, the rabbis had the power. And suddenly,
the gatekeepers,
the gatekeepers
holding on to information,
the gatekeepers, and suddenly that was unleashed on the many, and the institutions had to become redesigned. So what you get is monarchy being replaced by liberal democracy, you get capitalism, you get industrial revolution, and you have a completely new set of institutions. I think the next step change is now in our lives with the internet, the smartphone, AI. Suddenly, there's the ultimate shift in power from the elite to the many.
But basically, these institutions that have served us relatively well up until this point are, in your view, no longer fit for purpose.
They can't cope, because when you have all this information out there, you need to trust people. And in the previous era, trust wasn't quite as important. But now suddenly everything is visible. You have to start to build relationships of trust. And I don't think we trust anybody. I'll be straight. We don't trust business. We don't trust the state. We don't trust technology. We don't trust banks. There's a general failure to build trust. And that's why I think we're struggling. We can't trust anybody.
I mean, just the availability of information is such a huge change. And yet we need to replace that trust that's been lost. What's your sense of how that can come about?
Yes, the way I see it is we need to look at the reason why we're not trusting people, and like to think about 5 different sets of institutions or 5 different masters, perhaps the way to put it, that are not currently trusted, that we need to start building trust in. So the first one is the state. The state is critical. We can't survive without a state. But at the moment, we're struggling to trust the state. We've had Brexit, which was a vote against the state. Both political parties supported Remain, yet people voted with their own consciences and said we're out.
I just want to go back to just to hearing the 5 masters listed,
so the 5
and
masters,
then we can jump into to which ones.
So the 5 masters are the state, the market, the people that own land, landlords or landowners, the banks and money, and technology. So those are the 5 masters as I see them.
And the employer sort of fits into that.
The employer is part of the market. It's one and the same. So the market itself enslaves us, and the employer working for the company enslaves people as well. So it's the market in general is enslaving.
Sure. So just to go back, let's run through them one by one, because I think that's helpful. Just I guess I always start with the state because it feels, it's sort of, the macro point, if you will. But master number 1 is the state, and yet the state is not serving us so well in your view.
No, the state for me is critical, but it should be creating an environment for us to thrive. I don't think the state should be doing things. It should be ensuring that the environment is right. And we all live in states, certainly in the West, where at least 50% of the money is actually spent by the state. That actually means that we're not in control, because it's the money spent by people who are very remote from the coalface, often who haven't had experience in the actual world and are not close to it. And therefore, to me, that results in inflation. When you have people remote and inefficient, all the money that the state taxes actually ends up in increased prices. So fundamentally, we need to look at moving the responsibility back from the state to individuals and making them responsible for people, the planet, the ecosystem. And the state has taken far too much control, and that control needs to be let go and passed back to people.
Back to communities and
Back to family,
back to,
communities, society. It needs to be reversed. Yes, we need to. The state needs to free.
Sure. And just while we're going through this list, I guess, the banks and the financial system. Again, you're not a great advocate of the system as it stands, and your sense is that the banks ultimately take more than they give back.
Well, the banks, again, look at the history. You probably know more about this than me, but I'm not a historian. But my understanding is banking has been around for about 400 years. It came after the printing press, and it was a way of accounting, creating ledgers which were actually kept at each of the banks. But what's absolutely crazy is allowing banks to literally print money. These are private organizations without a social purpose that we give this right to actually create limitless amounts of money. And that money is being used and literally poured into the hands of those with assets and those with wealth, and is leaving behind those that haven't got wealth. So effectively, the system is massively inflationary in terms of asset prices. And therefore, the concept is absurd. I mean, in biblical terms, it would be forbidden. Very simply. Not even, when I put £100 in the bank, in biblical terms, that £100 is there for me. Now, not only are the banks not making the £100 there for me, they're actually lending £600 or £700, which is a crazy concept because the money's not there. And what it does is it actually inflates prices so that the price of an asset is what the banks will lend against that asset, which means that we have complete inequality, and it's destroying the system. And therefore, that model needs to be revisited. There is a role for lending, which we can discuss if you want, but it's not a privatized bank that can do whatever they want with the money.
Sure, we're going to get onto that. I've listed the landlord here as being, one master because, in your view, the rental system is not really working, and the inflation is hitting tenants hard. There's issues around exploitation of tenants. Something needs to give. What's your sense?
Can I just, you mentioned the land, which is interesting because I think when we set the scene, we have to remember it's not just us as human beings that are enslaved. The ecosystem, the world, the earth, Mother Earth, which is actually a being. We all come from the earth. The earth provides us with everything we need. That's also enslaved by the same five masters, and we mustn't forget that. We forget that the earth is actually a parent of ours, and I think when we respect our parents, that includes the earth. So yes, so the land, I think, is both landowners, not necessarily landlords. So landlords have amazing power, and I'm seeing them. The rate at which rent is growing. Again, rent is another form of interest because rent is charged for an asset. Whether it's money, which is charged interest, or rent for land. It's the same concept. And people are vulnerable, and landlords do not respect people, and they evict them, and their focus is on making money. And therefore, people are vulnerable and in servitude of the landlord. Now, landowners also are exploiting the actual land in terms of the agrarian economy. In the same way as we've enslaved people, we enslave the land, and therefore what we've done is completely destroying the ecosystem, the biodiversity. Land is all about productivity and
profit,
and we forget about actually looking after it and looking at biodiversity, looking at even though with the land, what we've seen is farms being destroyed, villages with farms which were around. All people have been moved to city. You've got a small number of very large producers of food who don't care about the land. We have to start to re-engage with the land and to recognise the land is actually a real being that needs to be looked after.
Sure.
So both the land owners, the land controllers are enslaving both us and the planet.
I mean, you mentioned, the employer and also the market. I mean, you yourself, historically employed thousands of people and ran a successful business, and yet businesses have got a more central role to play in community life. You think that's not about profit, that is about purpose.
Correct.
And employers are one of your masters, one of your masters that need to be
Correct.
reconfigured.
So the problem with the company is its purpose is to make money for the shareholders. That's inscribed in the Section 172 of the Companies Act. That's the purpose. And that's simply a mistake, because money is a means to an end. We worship money, and that's a mistake. So the company is focused on the wrong end, which is making money. It should be focused on both people and planet. So if you start looking at organizations and focusing on a social purpose, then a company can actually start to look after people, to build. And by the way, it's got to start to rebuild the family. So it's also very clear that a company at a moment almost becomes where our lives happen. I think we need to start using that form of organization to rebuild the family rather than to destroy the family, and start to rebuild the community. So there's definitely a function for that, but it's got to be in a mutualized form, not in a form of focusing solely on the shareholders.
Sure. And then lastly, technology, your fifth master. Technology is not in and of itself a bad thing, and yet the influence and the impact it's having on millions of lives is actually a negative in your view.
Absolutely. No, it's critical. It's what's triggered the changes. But the technology is being used to commoditize. So, we've got Twitter, we've got Facebook, and they're all competing to predict and control. They want to predict our behavior and control it. So they're trying to determine elections. They're trying to determine procurement decisions, buying decisions based on an algorithm so that we don't think. So they're taking away choice, which is obscene. And that's why people lose freedom of choice, and the way the smartphones are triggering people into becoming robots is sad, and it's destroying the lives of many young children, which is sad. But if we enhance and use the technology to actually give choice, to actually support decision making, to actually help to build families, it's a powerful medium that can change the world for the good. But at the moment, it's unrestrained and unlimited, and it's doing huge amounts of damage.
And I'm just kind of wrapping up on the five masters and sort of where we are. There's a big reset afoot in your view. So how does that come about? I mean, what's your sense of? I mean, I know you amongst many others think that there is an imminent event likely to happen over the next few years where this reset will actually become a natural course of events, almost based on a seismic moment in the way this country and other countries are run.
Yeah, experience shows that people won't really change unless they're forced to. So I think we're talking about a systemic failure, not of one organization, not just of the markets, but of the markets, of the state, of ownership of land, of technology, and of money. I think the whole lot needs a reset. And it's a 400-year event. And I think it's going to happen. And that would include asset prices crashing. That would include property and shares. But we're seeing it.
What replaces them? The reset occurs. There needs to be a huge rethink on how institutions are run and the role they play in society.
Correct.
And how does that come about, and how long does it take?
Brexit was a good example where the people chose. Both political parties said, no, well, let's remain, which was a mistake. And the people said, no, this isn't working for us. So you've got to get people engaged in thinking. Technology gives them information to help make decisions, but we need to start getting everyone involved and not treating people as plebs, as people who everyone gets engaged, and we start to think consciously about what the answers are. We don't.
But you get them engaged how? Because at the moment, many young people in particular feel very disenfranchised and forgotten. How do you bring people back into the conversation, into decision making?
Well, you've got
at a community level.
Well, it starts with the way we communicate. We need to start engaging with people and let's take almost the five masters, start with the state. At the moment, the parliamentary system isn't working. The MPs are almost, I hate to say it, but kind of managerial. It's not their fault, but they haven't had experience of the real world, and they're trying to change the world, but they haven't had the experience. So what we need to do is start to get them involved with community building, start to go to their constituency and actually start to talk to people, to build from the community and start engaging with people, with elders of the community, with people with the knowledge and experience, and start to reconnect with the community and start to give people a voice.
I mean, a lot of them would tell you that, you know, they are connected to their communities, that they do take note, that they do, you know, their you know, extended periods in front of constituents dealing with problems. Admittedly, some of them, you know, quite every day, as is the case with MPs. But you know, I think they would push back on that comment probably.
Yeah, but there's no framework. I mean, if there's no, what they're doing is almost whack-a-mole. A problem occurs, you have a knee-jerk reaction, you go to any whack-a-mole, and then it pushes the problem elsewhere. But because there's no vision, there's no central framework for the state. It's just random, and you've got complete misalignment within the political parties.
I mean, from your view, that framework is covenantal, correct?
Yes.
I mean, and
That's
what does that look like, and how would you define that? Because I know it's a challenge to do.
I take the lead from the Bible. I'll be straight with you. As you know, I've working with a team of world-class biblical scholars, but my background is not scholarship. It's actually the real world. But when you start working with experts on the text and you start asking the questions from the real world perspective, you get completely new understanding of how the whole system is supposed to operate. So the way the Bible works is you set a framework of principles, which is that you have to care for others, that you have to the Bible has views on lending, on banking, on technology, all of those issues, but that goes into a framework of law, but the law is narrative based. So the law is telling stories that people can understand it, and not the current law, which is very elitist, very semantic. It's based on words and meanings. We have to start talking the language that people can understand.
And talking about responsibilities, right?
Oh, 100%. It's not about, there's not a single right within the Bible. It's all about obligations. So people want to take responsibility for themselves, and they don't want to be told by the elites, this is what you're going to do. When we were working in Grimsby, we remember Billy, who was one of the team that we're working with and trying to help to in the levelling up agenda at Grimsby. He said, don't do it to us, engage us, help us to do it. And whilst the MPs do canvass opinion, they're not building closely enough, because their responsibility is at the centre anyway, and local authority is there as well. So whilst they may hear views and may actually support a particular issue, they're not actually working together to build a completely new vision, because there is no vision. So in terms of what you do is you create a vision, legislate for that vision, but it's not enforced by the courts. No. Because the court, I know that from my own experience, the courts don't work. It's too complicated.
It is about sharing benefits as well as burdens, isn't it? I mean, communities need to come together, perhaps with family at the centre, to then, you know, actually address, you know, the community needs, not individual wants.
We need to build outwards from the family. I talked about trust. The one thing we probably do trust, I hope we trust, is our wives and our kids. So you've got to start building outwards on the trust. So you start with a family, and I think the future, by the way, is a family-based business model. An agrarian, funnily enough, as much of it could be agrarian, because that connects you to the planet as well as the people. And then we build outwards from that trust and start to bring other people into the trust. So we've got to start rethinking. At the moment, our focus is on becoming empty nesters. We want the kids to go out and to be self-sufficient. No, we need to rebuild in the family. Not saying they live on our doorstep. We have to work with the family, encourage the kids to start taking responsibility for themselves
within their communities, and building businesses within their communities.
Oh, no question. This is not a centralised model. As I say, the state has to take the back seat. It's got to actually, a good statesman will ensure that he's almost invisible because the system works by itself. So we start getting them engaged, and the young people can feel that they can change the world. They're not going to wait to become an MD, which takes 30, 40 years, and they'll be up to their neck in debt. They don't need to be in debt at all. you can have a system without debt, without worries, where they can actually make an impact very quickly. And that's building around the family and starting to rebuild trust.
Sure. I mean, debt is a huge headache, and it's not a model that can be revised overnight. But what's your sense of how it could look in the next 10 years?
Again,
I have to borrow to go to university. I have to borrow to run a business. I have to borrow to buy a house. I mean, it's quite a tricky concept to sort of to do away with.
Well, the answer is why. I just say, why do you need to borrow? That is the way we've been brought up. But I'll be honest with you, the Bible says no. The Bible says every 7 years, debts are waived, full stop. And the system works so that we've got people.
They're more of a gift, is that right?
No, what it is,
more of a gift
what you're trying to do is
support.
No, it's not a gift. It's what you're trying to do is to encourage responsibility. So the way a loan is misguided because it's not really a loan. The word that the Bible uses for loan is actually a loving built relationship. So what you're trying to do is to work together to actually help people become more autonomous. So you do lend them money, but it's a loan without interest because the loan is about labor and making people work. So it's not about return on capital. It's about people working in a meaningful way. And then you work together, the lender works together with the borrower in a loving relationship to try and help the borrower become self-sufficient. And then at the end of 7 years, if it's failed from both parties' perspective, then it's waived. So you do not need to have this debt. This is a fiction. You don't need banks to create huge amounts. It just doesn't help. What the focus of money is to help everybody's needs to be met, but we don't need these debt. Simply don't need it.
And just looking at how a more covenantal framework can actually exist, I mean, it's sort of at a national level. How does that come about? Is that where the legislation works, and there is a partial legislative program to make sure that ideas like levelling up can become real and become practical? And
it's interesting. So we talked about the family and the community, but you're almost touching on the state and the nation, which is central to the model. And again, the Bible tells us what to do. I mean, what the Bible says is if somebody's values are alienated from yours, that you're allowed to keep them out because they will contaminate your family and your community. So what that means is, by all means, let's find allies in other nations. But the trouble is, for example, in the EU, is it was a federation, i.e., it was one set of laws that were imposed on us, which means that we didn't have our own identity. So we have to, and values which were alien to us, which were globalization, the corporate structure, that was part of the EU, and that meant that it was enslaving us again. So there was a need to work with other nations, because no nation state has all that it needs, but it's got to be a confederation, which in simple terms means that you have separate laws and you work together, but you only work with people whose values are aligned with yours. And therefore the trouble with China and the East is that effectively their values are not aligned with us. They're very Marxist, they're very dictatorial, and therefore they won't allow, and that's what's happened. Jobs have gone. And that's why people vote for Brexit, because they know that they haven't got jobs, we're not really producing things, which is crazy. So we have
and that's an important point, isn't it? That actually, okay, Brexit's been a challenging affair, full stop, but there is a chance that we can become a nation that makes things again and produces things and manufactures and becomes more self-sufficient. That's your sense.
Yeah, people are telling me that you made a mistake when you supported Brexit. But we haven't even given it a chance. If you think about what's happened since Brexit, we've had COVID, we've had complete chaos. So we haven't given it a chance, but it's the right answer because it frees people up and frees the nation up to start to thrive. And I think the UK can lead the way. We led the way 400 years ago with the Industrial Revolution because there was a space to create. And I think we'll lead the way again here. Effectively, so Brexit we need to reindustrialize. We can't just have banking and lawyers and accountants, which are all gatekeepers and elitists and earning ridiculous amounts of money for doing very little.
Yeah.
It upset people saying that, but that's the truth. Sure. And we need to start to re-engage in a really meaningful work, which is healthcare. We need to get the NHS working. It's not working. It's got to be not privatized, but mutualized by broken down into smaller units of mutual organizations that care for other people.
More autonomous units.
Yes, absolutely. The trouble is it's too dictatorial. It's too
Top down.
Top down. And you speak to doctors. I've got a lot of friends who are doctors. They haven't got the freedom to do what, and if they were given the space, they could. So the answer is we haven't got anywhere near enough people working in healthcare. We haven't got anywhere near enough people working in education. That's a massive opportunity to start to getting the ratio of teachers to kids up to another level. And then we need to start producing our own land, food, and we've got to reconnect to the actual planet. We're destroying the planet. So there's a completely new vision of a new UK, which I think starts to partner with countries that share its values and can lead the way.
Sure. That seems a good place to stop, actually, Philip. Thank you very much for that.